I didn't know my life would split into a before and an after because of a single sentence whispered in a ballroom. We had been at the gala for maybe 10 minutes when it happened. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above us. Waiters moved like shadows between donors and executives. And my husband, Ethan Carter, stood at my side in a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the rising star he had become. "Listen carefully," I whispered. "Don't embarrass me tonight. Tyler is really important. Do you understand?" Even as I said it, my tone felt colder than I intended. Controlled, polished, corporate. Before he could respond, I brushed invisible lint from his jacket lapel, fingers stiff, detached. Not affectionate, not loving. Adjusting him the way someone straightens a prop before a photo op. Then I glanced toward the service corridor near the bar, the narrow hallway where catering staff disappear in and out. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable back there," I added, not quite meeting his eyes. "The floor is getting crowded. I need to focus." He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded once. That was all. 18 years of marriage, and he gave me silence. I watched him walk toward the side hallway like he had somewhere else to be. No scene, no accusation, no wounded pride on display. Just quiet compliance. I told myself it was optics, strategy, positioning. I told myself I had to look independent. What I didn't know, what I didn't even consider, was that the man I had just dismissed like an outdated consultant was not ancient history. He was still one of the founders of the parent holding company that owned everything around us. He still had legal authority. He still had protections written into the corporate bylaws. And 3 minutes after I got home that night, he activated them. By Monday morning, my badge wouldn't work. And by Thursday, I was sitting in front of an ethics committee that used my maiden name like I was already erased. That night, under fake chandeliers, I thought I was elevating myself. I was actually dismantling my own future. I'm 42 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed I was building something extraordinary. With my husband, not because of him. Ethan and I met when we were both in our early 20s. He was brilliant, intense, already talking about corporate structures and long-term strategy like most people talk about weekend plans. I was ambitious, sharp, hungry to prove I could stand on my own. Back then, we were equals in drive, even if not in experience. Seven years later, when the company expanded into multiple divisions, I joined officially in a strategic development role. By then, Ethan had already established himself as one of the key architects of the infrastructure. Careful contracts, layered ownership, conservative but powerful governance rules. Then, one day, he stepped back. He said he wanted to focus on advisory work, mentoring, personal projects. "I don't need to be in every meeting to have impact," he told me over dinner one night. I remember teasing him. "You're retiring at 35? I didn't understand what that meant. What I saw was opportunity. Without him in daily operations, I could finally define my own identity inside the company. Not as Ethan Carter's wife, not as someone riding the wave of his early influence, as me. I worked aggressively. I built relationships. I aligned myself with Tyler Reynolds, mid-30s, charismatic, disruptive, the kind of executive investors love to quote in interviews. Tyler saw potential in me, or at least I believed he did. "You're sharper than most of the leadership team," he once told me after a board strategy session. "You just need to step out of Ethan's shadow." That phrase stayed with me, Ethan's shadow. I began noticing things I hadn't before. At industry dinners, people would ask him questions, even when I was the one presenting the quarterly metrics. At charity events, donors thanked him for the culture shift I had worked months to implement, and he never corrected them. Or maybe he didn't notice, but I did. At home, he was steady, calm, never threatened by my ambition. If anything, he encouraged it. "You don't need me to validate you," he'd say when I vented about being overlooked. "Your work speaks for itself." But that wasn't how it felt. It felt like I was constantly trying to separate my professional identity from my marriage. His name was still etched on the founder's plaque in the executive hallway. Mine wasn't. Even though I had climbed to director of strategic development. Even though I negotiated multi-million-dollar donor renewals. Even though I reshaped internal branding campaigns. When Ethan stepped back from daily leadership, I interpreted it as withdrawal. I assumed he was fully out, inactive, symbolic, ancient history. I never once searched the holding company registry to see what authority he still retained. I never asked. Because asking would have required admitting that maybe the foundation beneath me wasn't entirely mine. And that terrified me more than I realized. So that night at the gala, when I told him not to embarrass me, when I redirected him to the service hallway, I wasn't just managing optics. I was trying to prove I didn't need him. What I didn't understand was that independence doesn't require erasure, and I had just crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Looking back now, the gala wasn't the beginning. It was the culmination. The tension had been building for years. Quiet, subtle, almost invisible. At first, it was small things. During leadership meetings, I would present a strategy and someone would say, "That's very aligned with Ethan's early governance model." I would smile politely while something inside me tightened. At donor dinners, people would ask him about the company's long-term vision, even though he hadn't attended a strategy session in years. He would answer graciously, never overstepping, but his presence alone shifted the room's gravity. I started noticing how often executives deferred to him instinctively, even in silence, especially in silence. Tyler began feeding that frustration without meaning to. "You're the one running daily operations," he'd say. "Why does everyone still orbit him?" Because he built the core, I wanted to say. But instead, I nodded and absorbed the implication. If I wanted to rise, I had to detach. At home, Ethan remained steady, calm, observant, sometimes too observant. "Tyler's aggressive," he said once, casually, while we were cooking dinner. "That's why he's effective," I replied. "He's effective because he's ambitious. Ambition without respect is unstable." I remember rolling my eyes. "You're not in the trenches anymore," I told him. "You don't see what we're dealing with daily." He didn't argue. He just looked at me for a moment longer than usual, and then he changed the subject. That was his way. He never fought loud. He never demanded credit. He simply let structures exist. Meanwhile, my relationship with his longtime allies began to shift. Jennifer in accounting stopped looping me into informal financial briefings. Paul Mitchell, the director of compliance, became more formal in tone, more distant. I interpreted it as resistance to modernization. Now I realize it was caution. There were also moments at home that I ignored, like the night I found Ethan reviewing old incorporation documents at his desk. "Why are you looking at those?" I asked lightly. "Just checking something," he said. "Still paranoid about corporate coups?" I joked. He didn't smile. "Governance isn't paranoia," he replied. "It's preparation." I laughed it off. I thought he was being dramatic. What I didn't know was that buried inside those hundreds of pages was Provision 7D, the reputational safeguard for founders. I'd skimmed the bylaws years ago when I first joined the company. I remembered thinking they were overly cautious, almost theatrical. We used to invent ridiculous fate clauses together back when we were newly married. Things like, "No speeches longer than 6 minutes unless the speaker has lost a limb in battle or hostile takeover." We would laugh in our living room, wine glasses in hand. Somewhere along the way, I stopped laughing. He stopped joking. And he started filing real protections. I never asked which ones were real. The week before the gala, Tyler pulled me aside after a board preview. "You need to signal independence," he said quietly. "Optics matter. Donors still see you as Ethan's extension." "How?" I asked. "Distance," he replied. "Professional clarity." I interpreted that as public separation. I didn't understand that professionalism doesn't require humiliation. The seed of conflict wasn't hatred. It wasn't betrayal. It was ego wrapped in insecurity. I wanted to stand on my own. But instead of building higher, I tried to remove the foundation from the narrative, and foundations don't collapse quietly. They enforce themselves. The Gala was supposed to be a turning point in my career. Winter fundraiser, major donors, advisory council members, media coverage. Tyler had made it clear this was where the new leadership would be visible. I wore a fitted black gown, structured, elegant, controlled. The kind of dress that says authority without asking for permission. Ethan looked at me before we left the house and said softly, "You look powerful." I remember answering, "I need to be." He nodded. That was it. No tension. No warning. When we arrived, cameras flashed. The ballroom shimmered with curated wealth. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, polished marble floors reflecting ambition from every angle. For the first 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. Then Tyler arrived, confident, magnetic. Investors circled him immediately. He slipped into conversation with me, arm brushing mine. "We need strong optics tonight," he murmured. "Clean messaging, clear hierarchy." Hierarchy. That word landed heavier than it should have. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan speaking with an older board member. Calm, comfortable, familiar, too familiar. A donor approached Tyler and asked, "So, is Ethan advising the new strategy?" Before Tyler could answer, I stepped forward. "Ethan isn't involved in daily operations anymore," I said smoothly. "He used to consult here years ago." I felt Ethan's gaze on me, not angry, not confused, just still. The donor blinked. "Oh, I didn't realize." "That chapter's closed," I added lightly. Tyler squeezed my elbow in approval. Something inside me tightened, but I kept smiling. A few minutes later, I leaned toward Ethan. "Listen carefully," I whispered. "Don't embarrass me tonight. Tyler is really important. Do you understand?" His expression didn't change. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," he said quietly. "The optics matter," I replied. I brushed imaginary lint from his jacket, fingers precise, detached. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable near the service hallway. It's getting crowded out here." He held my gaze for a second. 18 years in that look. History, partnership, shared risk, and then he nodded, just once. No scene. No wounded pride. He turned and walked toward the corridor. The band started playing louder. Applause rose near the podium. The moment passed like nothing significant had happened, but it had. 20 minutes later, during my speech, someone in the crowd asked loudly, "Isn't that your husband over there?" Laughter rippled lightly through the room. I didn't hesitate. "Oh, him?" I said with a soft chuckle. "He used to do some consulting work here. Ancient history, really." The group laughed politely. Tyler shifted slightly beside me, but didn't correct it. The words left my mouth easily, too easily. What I didn't know was that someone had already posted a photo online. A clear image of me touching Ethan's chest and gesturing toward the exit, captured mid-dismissal. By the time we got home, the image had circulated internally. At 11:47 p.m., Ethan sent a message to Chairman William Hayes invoking Provision 7D. I didn't know that then. What I knew was this. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I called. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail, trying to sound casual. "Hey, I know that probably came out wrong tonight. It was just optics. Tyler needed to see independence. You understand how this works." Silence. 20 minutes later, I called again. This time, my tone shifted. "Ethan, if this is about some old corporate clause, come on. That stuff was symbolic. You wouldn't actually make it official, would you?" Still nothing. By the 6th voicemail, my voice sounded different, even to me. "Okay, I get it. You're angry. But this isn't just about us. There are reputations involved, careers, including mine." He never replied. Monday morning at 8:45, I walked up to the security gate like I had hundreds of times before. I scanned my badge. Red light. Access denied. I tried again. Red. The scanner beeped louder than usual. People were watching. Maria at reception didn't look up. 3 minutes later, a facilities manager approached me with a cardboard box. My heart dropped. Not dramatically, just steadily, like an elevator descending too fast. "There must be a mistake," I said. "There isn't." Inside the box was a printed photo from the Gala, the same one circulating online. Beneath it, an internal memo. "Reputational trigger under provision 7D confirmed. Immediate review initiated." That was the moment. Not the whisper, not the service hallway, not the speech. This. Standing in heels on cold marble flooring, holding a box with my nameplate unscrewed and placed inside like evidence. That was when I realized I had miscalculated something fundamental, and whatever I thought was symbolic wasn't. I didn't cry in the lobby. That's the first thing I remember. My hands were shaking, yes. My heartbeat felt like it was pressing against my ribs, but I didn't cry. I sat in the designated seating area, cardboard box resting on my lap, and stared at my own nameplate lying face up inside it. Rebecca Carter, Director of Strategic Development. The title looked strangely temporary outside its wall. For years, I had believed I earned that office through performance, persistence, negotiation. And I had. But I had also assumed something else, that stepping into power meant rewriting who had it before me. I didn't understand the difference between building upward and erasing backward. 40 minutes passed before someone from compliance came down. Not Paul Mitchell himself. An assistant. Polite. Neutral. Clinical. "You'll receive formal notice of review within 24 hours, she said. "You are required to appear Thursday at 10:30 a.m. "Review for what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Reputational breach under provision 7D. The number echoed. 7D. I hadn't thought about that clause in years. Back when Ethan and I used to joke about overly dramatic corporate safeguards. Back when governance felt abstract. Ethan wouldn't, I began, but stopped. Wouldn't what? Enforce something he had legally embedded? Defend himself? Protect his legacy? I walked out of the building carrying the box. No one stopped me. A few colleagues glanced in my direction and quickly looked away. Word travels fast in corporate environments. By the time I reached my car, I felt it fully. Isolation. That evening, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. I searched the internal directory for Ethan's name. Nothing in active employee listings. Then I searched the holding company registry, 3 levels deep in the corporate structure. There it was. Ethan Carter, Legacy Stakeholder Founding Partner. Director Emeritus Class B. Silent Authority. Status active. Active. The words sat there in green. I clicked into the bylaws. Section 7, subsection D. The language was precise, clinical, brutal in its neutrality. Any beneficiary or public representative of the firm who initiates reputational damage, exclusion, or denigration of any protected founder during an official corporate event shall trigger immediate board oversight review under the Discretionary Stability Protocol. Below that, a list of protected names. Ethan Carter, still there. My stomach tightened. I wasn't being punished because he was vindictive. I was being reviewed because I had publicly humiliated someone with protected status at a corporate-sponsored event. There's a difference, and I had never bothered to learn it. At midnight, I called him again. This time, he answered. Ethan. His voice was calm. Always calm. "You triggered 7D, I said quietly. "Yes." No defensiveness, no anger, just confirmation. "You could have talked to me first." "I did talk to you," he replied, "for years." The words hit harder than any raised voice would have. "This wasn't personal," I insisted. "It was professional positioning." "You erased me publicly," he said, "at an event funded by donors I recruited, in front of a board that remembers who built the structure you're operating in." Silence stretched between us. "I didn't know you still had authority," I said. "You never asked." There it was again. Not accusation, just fact. "I was trying to step out of your shadow." "You were never in my shadow," he replied softly. "You chose to stand behind me whenever recognition felt uneven. That wasn't my design." My throat tightened. "I built my own career." "Yes," he agreed, "you did. But independence doesn't require humiliation." I didn't have an answer, because deep down, I knew something uncomfortable. When the donor asked about him, I could have said, He's one of the founders, but he stepped back from daily operations. That would have been true. Instead, I called him ancient history. Not because it was accurate, because it served my narrative. You didn't fight back that night, I said quietly. I don't fight loud, he answered. I fight long. The sentence sent a chill through me, not threatening. Strategic. I didn't do this to destroy you, he added. I enforced a boundary. By removing my access? By activating governance you agreed to when you joined. Another truth I couldn't escape. When I signed my executive contract, I agreed to uphold the Founders Preservation Statutes. Is this about our marriage? I asked finally. A pause. It's about respect, he said. Not revenge. Not dominance. Respect. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house felt different. Not hostile. Just altered. For 18 years, I had seen him as steady support, almost passive. I mistook quiet for absence. I mistook stepping back for stepping away. Now I was realizing something else. The people who build foundations rarely announce it every day. They just ensure the structure remembers. And Monday morning had proven the structure remembered. Tuesday morning, the formal notice arrived. Hand-delivered. A courier in a dark suit stood at my door, expression neutral, badge clipped neatly to his lapel. Rebecca Carter? Yes. He handed me a sealed envelope with the holding group's insignia pressed into red wax. It felt theatrical, heavy. Inside was a single page. Notice of mandatory review. Ethics and Oversight Committee Provision 7D. Invocation. Date of appearance, Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Location, 14th floor, Conference Room C. Failure to appear would result in assumed violation and administrative penalties under Articles 4, 5, and 9. At the bottom, signed, Director of Compliance, Paul Mitchell. Paul. The same Paul who had sat at our dining table years ago while Ethan explained governance structures over steak and red wine. The same Paul Ethan mentored. And now he was enforcing the clause I triggered. I sat down slowly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was machinery. By noon, my phone started vibrating non-stop. Jennifer from accounting called first, from her personal phone, not the office line. Do you understand what you did? She asked. Not angry, just steady. I dismissed him at a gala, I replied. It was optics. It was recorded optics, she corrected. And he still holds majority silent stakeholder status. Silence. What does that actually mean? I asked. It means he has veto authority over executive reputational matters, she said. No expiration date. It stays active unless he sells or dies. My fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't know. Rebecca, she sighed softly. Not knowing doesn't void a contract. The call ended. An hour later, Tyler texted me. We need to talk. We met that evening in his office. Well, what used to be my building. I was escorted in by a compliance assistant and restricted to designated floors. Tyler looked different. Not polished. Not confident. Tired. You embarrassed a founder, he said without greeting. I embarrassed my husband, I corrected. Your husband is my first investor. The words landed like cold water. What? When I was 19, he continued, pacing slightly, no one would touch my startup proposal. I had no track record, no connections. Ethan co-signed my first funding round, introduced me to Chairman Hayes, paid for my initial legal counsel. My chest tightened. You never mentioned that. You never asked, he snapped, mirroring Ethan's words in a way that felt almost cruel. He believed in me when I had nothing, Tyler continued. Everything I've built traces back to that decision. I felt something shift under my feet. You think I was protecting your image? Tyler said, voice lowering. You humiliated the man who built the road I'm standing on. I swallowed. I didn't know he still had influence. That's the problem, he replied. You assumed. There it was again. Assumption. You aligned yourself publicly with me, Tyler continued, while dismissing him in front of half the advisory council. It looked like a power play. It was positioning, I whispered. It was disrespect. Silence filled the room. We're done professionally, Tyler said finally. This isn't about office politics anymore. This is about credibility. He stepped back from me, not dramatically, just decisively. That hurt more than the badge denial, because I realized something brutal. I had tried to attach myself upward, and in doing so, I severed the foundation beneath me. Thursday morning arrived. The 14th floor hallway was intentionally plain. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, minimal decoration. At the end of the corridor, before conference room C, there was a steel plaque. I had walked past it hundreds of times, but I had never really looked at it. Founders, patrons, strategic partners. My eyes scanned the names. Then I saw it. Ethan Carter, founding partner, director emeritus. No former, no retired, just active title, indefinite. My name was not on that wall. It never had been. The doors opened. Inside, 12 seats. 11 occupied. At the head sat Chairman William Hayes. He didn't offer water. He didn't offer sympathy. Let's begin. I sat at the far end. Miss Sullivan, he said, using my maiden name for the record. The sound of it felt like distance. Please confirm that you publicly dismissed a founding director at an official corporate event. The room was silent. I could hear my own breathing. I didn't know he still held that title, I said. Legacy titles are not revoked by assumption, Chairman Hayes replied calmly. They are governed by statute. His tone wasn't angry. That made it worse. Please confirm for the record, he repeated. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. Yes, I said. He signed something. That was it. No drama. Just documentation. A legal folder slid toward me. Inside, separation agreement, severance package, contingent on comprehensive non-disclosure, quiet exit, or public litigation. There was no real choice. After the hearing, I stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Tyler. His face was pale. You had no idea who he was to me, he said quietly. I'm starting to understand. You didn't just hurt him, Tyler said. You hurt the network that trusts him. Network. That word echoed. Ethan didn't need daily operations. He had architecture, governance, long memory. By Friday, my termination was finalized. Internal announcement. Leadership transition. No scandal. No public disgrace. Just removal. Clean. Efficient. Strategic. That weekend, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by packed boxes from my office. I kept replaying the gala in my mind. The whisper. The lint brushing. The hallway. The word ancient history. I had thought I was performing strength. I was performing insecurity. And the system I underestimated did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected its foundation. Not loudly. Not emotionally, but completely. The house felt different after the termination papers were signed. Not empty, just honest. For years, our home had been layered with quiet assumptions about power, about partnership, about who needed whom more. Now there was no ambiguity. Ethan moved through the house the same way he always had, measured, steady, composed. He didn't gloat, he didn't withdraw, he didn't punish. That almost made it worse. If he had yelled, I could have defended myself. If he had insulted me, I could have responded, but he didn't. Instead, he treated me like someone who had made a decision and now had to live inside it. We sat across from each other one evening at the kitchen table. No wine, no raised voices, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the background. Are you going to fight it? He asked. The termination? I replied. Yes. I stared at my hands. I don't have the leverage. That's not what I asked. I looked up at him. You triggered it, I said. I enforced it, he corrected. Silence settled between us. I didn't do it to destroy you, he continued. I did it because what happened at that gala wasn't a professional adjustment. It was a public erasure. The word landed heavy. Erasure. I wanted to argue. To say it was positioning. Optics. Strategic distancing. But every version of the explanation sounded thinner than it had before. I felt invisible, I admitted finally. He didn't interrupt. For years, people credited you for things I built, I continued. Even after you stepped back, even when I was leading, it felt like I was never fully seen. He nodded once. I can understand that, he said. The calm in his voice made my throat tighten. But invisibility doesn't justify humiliation. That was the sentence that broke something open inside me, because he was right. I had felt unseen, and instead of addressing it privately, honestly, maturely, I performed independence publicly, at his expense. The next morning, the divorce papers were drafted. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation. No shattered glass, no screaming. Just signatures. Some betrayals are loud. Ours was procedural. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. In that stretch of time, the weight of everything settled fully. Friends stopped calling. Industry contacts grew distant, not because of scandal, there wasn't one, but because alignment matters in corporate circles. And I had publicly miscalculated. One evening, alone in the apartment I'd moved into, I opened my laptop and watched the Gala video again. The clip had circulated internally during the review process. I paused it on the moment my hand pressed lightly against Ethan's chest. I studied my face. Confident, polished, detached. I looked powerful, but not kind, and not secure. That realization hurt more than losing my title, because I had always believed I was principled. Ambitious, yes, but fair. And in that moment, I wasn't fair. I was threatened. Threatened by history. Threatened by legacy. Threatened by the idea that someone else had built the structure I was standing inside. For the first time, I asked myself a question I should have asked years ago. Why did I need to erase him to feel elevated? The answer was uncomfortable, because I equated visibility with worth. And I thought the only way to be seen was to ensure no one else occupied the frame. That insecurity cost me everything I thought I had built. Not because Ethan destroyed it, but because I revealed something about myself that governance couldn't ignore. I sat on the floor that night, back against the couch, lights off, no anger left, no defensiveness, just clarity. I hadn't been fighting Ethan. I had been fighting my own fear of standing independently. And instead of strengthening myself, I weakened my credibility. The lowest point wasn't losing the job. It wasn't the divorce. It was recognizing that the woman in the ballroom, the one whispering about embarrassment, wasn't the woman I believed I was. That realization stripped away the last layer of illusion. And in the quiet that followed, I had to decide. Was I going to blame him forever, or was I going to rebuild myself without erasing anyone else? The turning point didn't come from revenge. It came from clarity. About 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer. "Can we meet?" she asked. We chose a quiet cafe downtown, neutral ground. She looked at me carefully when I sat down. "You look different," she said. "I am different," I replied. There was no hostility between us, just realism. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she began, lowering her voice slightly, "but I think you need context." "About what?" "About Ethan." I stiffened slightly, but nodded. "When he invoked Provision 7D, she said, he didn't request termination. He didn't ask for executive removal. He triggered review and protective oversight. The board made the personnel decision after assessing reputational risk." I blinked. "He didn't demand my removal?" "No," she said calmly. "He activated a clause designed to prevent founders from being erased publicly. That's all." The information landed differently than I expected. For weeks, I had framed it as retaliation, calculated, punitive. But what Jennifer was describing wasn't vengeance. It was boundary enforcement. "There was a closed-door discussion," she continued. "Some board members actually suggested mediation. Ethan declined. He said, if she cannot distinguish ambition from respect, governance will." My chest tightened. "He wasn't trying to ruin you," Jennifer added gently. "He was protecting structure." Structure. I had spent years navigating branding, optics, influence. He had been protecting infrastructure. There's a difference. I went home that evening and opened the bylaws again. This time, not to find loopholes, not to search for ways around consequences, but to understand. Provision 7D wasn't personal. It was neutral language protecting legacy stakeholders from public denigration. It didn't mention me. It didn't target spouses. It didn't care about emotion. It simply responded to trigger conditions. And I had triggered it. That night, I stood in my apartment and looked at myself in the mirror. No title. No executive access. No corporate hallway with plaques. Just me. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a different question. If no one knew who I was married to, if no one saw me attached to power, who would I be? The answer surprised me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't dependent. I had built genuine skills. Negotiation, strategic planning, stakeholder management. Those didn't disappear because I lost a position, but they had been clouded by something else. Comparison. I had been competing with a legacy instead of strengthening my own. A few days later, I requested one final meeting with Ethan, not to argue, not to revisit the divorce, but to close something internally. We met at a quiet coffee shop. He arrived exactly on time, still composed, still steady. I understand it now, I said without preamble. Understand what? You didn't erase me. I erased myself by trying to erase you. He watched me carefully, saying nothing. I thought independence meant detachment, I continued. I confused public positioning with strength. He nodded slightly. I never wanted you behind me, he said. I wanted you beside me. The simplicity of that statement hit harder than any board ruling. I should have talked to you, I admitted. Yes, he said gently, you should have. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. We didn't reconcile. We didn't reverse anything, but something shifted inside me. I stopped viewing the gala as the night I lost everything. It became the night I confronted something flawed in myself. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Not the ethics committee, not the termination, not the divorce papers. The moment I accepted responsibility without self-destruction. Because accountability isn't humiliation, it's maturity. And for the first time in years, I felt steady. Not because I was attached to power, but because I understood myself without needing to stand in anyone else's shadow. Consequences in corporate life rarely explode. They settle quietly. Precisely. After my termination, there was no public scandal, no press release, no industry gossip columns dissecting what happened at the winter fundraiser. Just a simple internal memo. Leadership restructuring, effective immediately. But internally, the ripple effects were undeniable. Tyler's position weakened first, not because Ethan demanded it, because credibility shifted. Board members who had once celebrated Tyler's aggressive modernization began asking sharper questions about donor relations, about risk management, about loyalty. In governance environments, perception matters. And aligning yourself publicly with someone who misjudges legacy authority is not considered strategic. Within 2 months, Tyler's responsibilities were redistributed. His name remained on the website, but not in the same spotlight. Jennifer told me later that several advisory council members quietly reduced their engagement. Not dramatic withdrawals, just distance. Because the board had been reminded of something fundamental. Infrastructure outlasts charisma. Meanwhile, Ethan remained exactly where he had always been, calmly positioned. He didn't step back into daily operations. He didn't reclaim an executive office. He simply resumed advisory oversight in a slightly more visible capacity. Mentoring. Strategic planning. Long horizon decisions. The plaque in the hallway still bore his name, unchanged. As for me, I signed the separation agreement. Clean exit. Non-disclosure. Severance. It wasn't punishment. It was professional closure. A month later, I accepted a position at a smaller consulting firm in a different industry. No legacy plaque, no donor galas, no silent stakeholders, just work. Direct, measurable, transparent. The first day I walked into that new office, No one knew my marital history. No one knew about Provision 7D. No one saw me as someone stepping out of a founder's shadow. They saw a woman with strategic experience and a complex resume. For the first time in years, I felt oddly light. There was no foundation to compete with, no invisible hierarchy humming beneath the surface, just performance. But the real fallout wasn't corporate. It was personal. The divorce settlement was straightforward. We divided assets cleanly, no hostility, no courtroom theatrics. When we met to finalize paperwork, Ethan looked at me with something that wasn't resentment. It was distance, the kind that forms when respect fractures. I never wanted it to end like this, I said quietly as we signed the last page. I know, he replied. Do you regret enforcing it? I asked. He paused before answering. No, he said gently. I regret that it became necessary. That sentence followed me home. Regret that it became necessary. Because the truth was, none of this had to happen. If I had simply acknowledged him that night, if I had introduced him accurately, if I had chosen partnership over performance, there would have been no clause triggered, no review committee, no termination, no divorce. But governance didn't destroy my marriage. My insecurity did. And that realization was sharper than any corporate consequence. Months passed. Industry whispers faded. Tyler moved to a different firm eventually. Smaller scope, less visibility. Ethan continued advising the holding group, and I built something quieter, more intentional. One afternoon, a junior associate at my new firm asked me during a strategy session, "How do you handle feeling overshadowed by senior leadership?" The question froze me for half a second. You don't erase them, I said. You build your own credibility so clearly that no one confuses the difference. She nodded thoughtfully, and in that moment, I realized something unexpected. The fallout didn't just remove me from power. It clarified my character, because losing a position reveals whether you had identity or just access. And for a while, I had confused the two. Ethan didn't need to ruin me. He didn't need revenge. He didn't even need public vindication. The system he built responded automatically. That's what governance does. It doesn't shout, it executes. It's been over a year now. Sometimes I still think about the ballroom, the whisper, the service hallway, the word ancient history. I replay it not with anger, but with understanding. I thought independence required detachment. I thought strength required visible dominance. I was wrong. Real strength doesn't humiliate. Real independence doesn't erase history. And real authority doesn't need to announce itself. Ethan stepped back from daily operations, but he never stepped away from responsibility, from structure, from protection. But I confused visibility with value. The night I tried to rewrite the narrative, the foundation responded. Not emotionally, not vindictively, just accurately. I'm not a villain in this story, and neither is he. We were two ambitious adults who misunderstood each other's silence. He believed structure would speak for itself. I believed performance would define reality. The truth is somewhere in between. I don't measure myself against plaques on walls. I don't need to remove anyone from the frame to feel seen. Because I finally understand something I should have known all along. You can step forward without pushing someone else back. And if you ever find yourself tempted to rewrite history for the sake of appearing powerful, pause. Ask yourself why. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who built it. And sometimes the most painful lessons aren't about losing position. They're about losing perspective. I lost a title. I lost a marriage. But I gained something harder to build than influence. Self-awareness. And this time, I built it without erasing anyone else.